ones that are,
Okay.
the ones that are.
You ready, bro?
But not a lot of
A lot of them will tell you that.
But I've seen a documentary on that.
Can we hand these out?
Okay. Do that so you feel better. Certain that you're dumb with it. You know I'm a scientist, you're
Yeah.
You're
Well, I said that anyway, 6 years old, my first word, but now it's.
Are we ready?
Hot dog.
Ready?
Richard.
Are we ready? Everybody ready?
Rich is going to hand these out, and he's our next speaker. And I've read some of the things he's written. I went online and Googled him to find out who the heck he was at first. And so he's going to talk to us about the European Contagion Theory. And so please welcome him.
All right.
Thank you for having me here as Squatching. This is like historic kind of expedition this year. This is the first time we've had this many people for the expedition here at Big Elk. So, I mean, this many presenters and everything from all over. I wanted to take the time to give one of the theories that I've been working on for a while called the European Contagion Theory. And it ties into really what Red Squatching is all about, respectfully connected. And when you look historically at the relationship between Citonga and the Native American people and Sasquatch and the folklore that have gone along with that, there is kind of some gaps in that history. And I think that this theory will help you understand that, why there was this gap and why we are here today to be connected back to Citonga. So there's a couple of the premises to this theory that I have, and it goes back to the original, if you go through the pages here, the first page has an introduction to me. I guess all of you already know me, but I do go through some of the things that I've done research on. I guess I take it for granted when I meet people a lot because I've been doing this for a while, but I have been researching since 2011. I've done research on expeditions private and publicly, the Mississippi River Valley, the Missouri River here. I've done also the forests, mountain forests of elevations 10,000 feet in the Gigas Mountains of New Mexico, Colorado, and Montana. And I've identified tree and stick structures in all of those locations, and that has corroborated some of the research that I've done on my website, which is called the Gigas study, which is night giant in Latin. And so I've used that as my repository. I previously used to post things on the BFRO forum. I was a member of the BFRO and Red Squatching. And the forum went down about a year ago, and they apparently aren't going to be posting stuff on this forum, which is really sad because that was where people were able to kind of interact. I think most people they want people now to do it on Facebook. But anyway, so I joined Facebook, and I've never been in that, so I guess that did force me to get involved in that. But the BFRO forum used to have a lot of information, and I had this theory and some other theories on there that people could talk about, and so I was pretty proud of this theory. It's kind of been kicked around for a few years in Native American culture about disease contagions affecting the relationship with Sasquatch. But what I've done is I've broken it down into a global type of theory. And so the two premises that I look at for this theory is the first one is that there are emergent hominids that had relic hominids or emergent hominids all over the world that we're finding that we're interbreeding, and we have scientific evidence of this. The first one, myself, I did my own DNA in December and found out that I have Neanderthal DNA. If you do 23andMe, they will do the Neanderthal DNA, and they'll be able to tell you if you have it or not. I can tell you probably without taking the test, if you're of European descent and you have German or French, which is the heart of Europe, you most likely will carry Neanderthal DNA, because that came from Germany. And so that was a emergent hominid and Homo sapiens coming together, and here I am, a living hybrid. So there are precedents for hybrids. The other thing is, we found recently, if you're kind of a science nerd like I am, you'll see that periodically there's things that come up in science where there's been new discoveries. There was recently the Denisovian man, which is in the Asia, and that would be descendants from Homo sapiens and the Denisovian were interbreeding, and that is the modern Asian population we have today. The other one that was more recent that they just came out with in sub-Saharan Africa, they found a ghost gene with sub-Saharan African population. And they found the way they're able to do this with DNA anymore, they take a spit tube and from your mucus membranes, they identify genes in this mucus that relates to each one of these different emergent hominids. So as we said earlier, we are primates, and these emergent hominids were all breeding, and they were interacting and interbreeding. Once they emerged into their various parts of the world, they started interbreeding. That is a rule, it's not an outlier. And prior to this, science pretty much thought we were the lone, primate, or the Homo sapien on the top of the food chain, but in reality, we're finding that the DNA is a little, it's more of a bush than a tree. There's a lot more going on there. And the reason I like to refer it to emergent hominids, because we're finding more and more of this around the world as like we said with ice age things being melting and other types of research being done around the world, and just the fact that we have DNA research that can really pinpoint as they find fossils what the DNA structure is. So that's the first premise of this European Contagion Theory, is that we would need to be able to share similar DNA to share disease. And the second premise of this then is several epochs that took place. The first one would be in Europe, and that would be during the plague. And during the plague, there was all sorts of about 50 to at least 50% of Europeans passed away. 50-some million people in Europe passed away. Prior to the plague, there was all sorts of pencil drawings and other things, and I'll get to that in a second when I work with the European. But they had all sorts, they called the Woodwose, the wild man, I think it's in Squatching in France, which is the king of the forest. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But anyway, we had this precedent then in Europe. There was a plague. You have the history, oral history, much of it. We have pencil drawings and all sorts of on. The Woodwoses were on churches. They were all over Europe. After the plague, when you have this epoch, you have the death of some 50 million people, then this is relegated to folklore. Suddenly there wasn't the Woodwose. Woodwose was just an imaginary figure in history, and it did not truly exist. And when you look now and through history, we come to and essentially what the plague did is that set that precedence, and that was the first epoch. The second epoch then, when we come to the Americas, the Spanish explorers came and spread disease contagions to the Mayans, and the Mayans were the first to do trade up in the Americas, and they spread the smallpox and that to Native American populations on the East Coast. Once they came in, the Spanish finally came in, they said that there was literally skeletons and bodies laying around in all of these villages that were along the East Coast. This contagion spread rapidly, just like it did in the plague in Europe, which was just rapid spread of it. And I could go back to how the original plague was spread. It was because they confined animals in farming practices, and the rats then spread the disease to the people. And by having confined animals instead of free range, you created some mutation strain of diseases like smallpox that would plague that just was lethal for people. We brought that over, this was brought over then, it was originally spread by the Mayans. Now people think it was actually the Spanish spread it to them, so it was Europeans who brought it. But this disease contagion wiped out upwards of 80% of Native Americans as it spread throughout the Americas. Here in Nebraska, the Ponca tribe, which is up in Niobrara, confluence of the Niobrara, they had about 800 people in their tribe, and then once Lewis and Clark came in the 1700s, there was down to 100 people. So we know this contagion, the low point in the Americas was about 500 years ago, and the high point of the population of Native Americans was 5,000 years ago. So about 500 years ago, they reached their lowest point of population when this European contagion came here. The same thing we can now say occurred in the Americas. We have all this folklore that took place. We have the Citonga, we have trade going on. There was stories that in the northwest part of the country during the salmon runs, they used to see the Bigfoots doing fishing along the rivers. They would be there during salmon runs. And then after the disease contagion, they didn't see them anymore. So I definitely believe this kind of fills in some of those gaps and those epochs of those two things significantly happened in Europe first and then happened here in America. So I wanted to take a look at, just kind of go over some of the evidence of this. And when you look at in this country, we have some relationships of trade. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. Some of it's bad. If you look on the connection, let's read this page, it says red squatching. There's Gigas, there's an article about Gigas there. This was taken from a 500-year-old archaeological site that was spread. This was talked about when I was in these mountains in New Mexico, Colorado, and it talks about red-haired giants and being cannibalistic. And so there were, that would be one way you could catch a disease contagion if you were eating people. Definitely you would catch it that way. We also know through abductions that in Europe and in the Americas here that females were abducted. And there's some evidence that even males were abducted to interbreed with the local hominid population. When you get, so that could spread the disease also. It would also explain why it would shape some of their behavior. They may be really reclusive if they were doing trade with us before, but then they find out if we get near them, we can die. We can get sick, they would die. And if that's spread over a period of time, then you're going to see them more reclusive, and then with the populations decreased, then you just not seeing them around anymore. So
Are you talking now about the Native Americans that became more reclusive?
The Bigfoot, the
Oh,
Sasquatch.
you're talking about now the Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Native Americans also were affected, and that certainly affected their whole culture. That affected their trade. It wiped out entire oral histories and different traditions and things in Native American culture. They had bridged. They had immense history in this country that was just completely ignored by science as far as their cultures and things that they had contributed. They were much more developed than what we would, science was trained in. That's what came here. The disease did the same thing here. Exactly wiped out a huge population, upwards of 80%. When you go to Europe, I just wanted to show some evidence of that. Go to European history, I have that. And I'm just kind of instead of going through all of this, I was going to have a PowerPoint, but I printed this up because I suspected we may have some technical issues. So I also wanted you guys to have individually something to take with you so that you guys can read through this on your own. This is on my website, and I have a lot of other things of research from red squatching. I have some great pictures and a whole bunch of things on the website. But if you look at European history, this is proof they had some really significant things, and I thought this was really cool. the Basajuan of France is called the King of the Forest. And if you look, he's got a club. This is from the like 1400s, something like that. So this would have been prior to the plague. And then there's also, on the next page, one of the more famous ones, fighting the forest. And if you look at that one, that's very significant because the morphology of that woodwose there is very curious as to compared to the knights fighting it. That's like real size Bigfoot. That's the real deal. And notice he's standing on a tree. Imagine that. And he's pulling another tree branch to kind of protect himself. And when you look at some of his facial features, he almost looks like a Homo Sapiens. He's a very hairy Homo Sapiens. So that's curious too. I wonder what all that means. And then you see some of the other things that were popular during that period. They would have other artwork that was done, but you would have kind of an X type shape that was put in this picture with the woodwose. I wonder if they were making X's back then. I bet they were. I bet they were doing the same things that they're doing nowadays. So I thought that was curious. Then you can even go, when I found out my own, when I did the DNA, I found out that my family came over on the Mayflower on 13th generation, which I knew that, from 1620, George Soule, my great-grandfather, 10 times over, came over on the Mayflower, so we've been here a long time. I've also had some Native American DNA, so I'll go into that. But what I found out is my haplogroup is a Scandinavian. And I always thought, well, we came from England. How would I be Scandinavian? What's going on with that? The reality is that your maternal haplogroup, your male, carries on. And I carry genes from the Vikings who came into the English. And many people who in the English islands there, and the Scottish Isles, Ireland, have Scandinavian ancestry. If you do your DNA, that almost trumps all of those because the Vikings just took over all of that.
Can you say one more time about you saying the paternal carries on is more dominant? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, and I will kind of explain how that paternal side works when and I'll just
Okay,
ask you a
I just
question.
wanted to
That's a
make sure.
very good question, and that's going to be the key to understanding the differences in appearance of the Bigfoot. So here I'm carrying genes that I didn't even know that were in a haplogroup from like 28,000 years ago, and it was Viking genetics that I have, and I've been here for 400 years, and I'm still carrying the same genes. You'd think I would be more assimilated. I was 99.6% Scandinavian or Northern Europe, and my haplogroup, only 10% of people who live in Scandinavia today have that haplogroup. So I'm more Scandinavian than people who live there, which is bizarre when you think about it. But let me explain how that works. That's intriguing. But here you got this picture of something that's called, I won't even begin. I just found out this in December, so I had no history of the Norse or anything like that, other than all of the legends they have. They were always after giants. The Norse has all these legends of giants and chasing giants, so I thought that's pretty cool. But if you look at this picture, I found this on the internet. In Switzerland, there were wild men, and they called them there's a festival called the Lokenskval, and they used to toss. They would dress up like this. Of course, that looks curious, and they would throw soot at the people in the community. And so nobody knows where all this came from, why they would do such a wild thing. Well, I imagine that they are just mimicking some ancient interaction. These communities would have been very isolated, and they had interactions with the local emergent hominids there, and they're just really reenacting it. So this was literally all over. They're called the Tashgada or something. I just butchered the language, but anyway, the pictures I thought looked really cool. So then let's take a look at the DNA. I want to kind of keep moving along here. So we have these emergent hominids in the U.S. and around the world. So this is a global. This theory plays just as well as in Europe as it does here in our own continent. I want to stress that. And I think this will be interesting once, now that I'm on Facebook, I'm kind of communicating with some of Adam Davies, who's a European researcher. I'm hoping to kind of expand this and hope people in Europe are going to realize that these hominids are there, they're rebounding just like they're rebounding here in our country. We're having sightings, they're having sightings over there. I see structures on the internet that are exactly the same as we're building, we're seeing here.
She said take pictures of prints and stuff, and this is a great print.
Yep, it's a perfect example. And so you can tell her, yeah, well, they probably died off when there was a contagion there, and they're back though. They're coming back, and look at all the evidence that they were there before. There's woodwoses on these churches. There's all these countries have names for a wild man. Lioness, who was from Switzerland, who came up with and Cassie, that he's one of the founders of the nomenclature, binomial nomenclature. He founded that, and so that's a classification system. He came up with the Homo ferus, and his description of it, that it was a mute, hairy wild man that lived in the nether regions, and that it was a distinct difference from the Homo sapiens. It wasn't somebody who went crazy and lived on the periphery of the town, and we just took food out to him. No, this person did binomial nomenclature. This is a scientific mind that we use today. He knew the difference between what was a Homo sapien and what he termed a Homo ferus. So without question, science has already ended the subject on this. They existed then, they exist today. It's a done deal. We just need to remind people of that. And so I thought that was really cool. But to get back to what we're looking at, how this would affect our DNA. So we've got all these emergent hominids, so we have evidence now through their mucous membranes that we have DNA. We're able to extract all this information and find out that we have the Denisovian man who's responsible for interacting with Homo sapien in Asia and having they're an Asian population. We have the now an unknown ghost gene in sub-Saharan Africa that they have no idea where this ghost gene came from, but it's an unknown hominid, emergent hominid, breeding with sub-Saharan African people. We have me standing here, a modern day hybrid of Neanderthal DNA and Homo sapien. Without question, they were interbreeding. But how does all this work for the Sasquatch? The Sasquatch would be an emergent hominid. They would have been doing the same thing. It was interbreeding. So the Sasquatch, without question, is a hybrid. It's not an outlier. It cannot be any different than the rest of us. It had interbred. And because most likely it was male interbreeding with female populations. Actually, the Elk Park study had identified like 30,000 years ago, a female Native American had interbred with a unknown hominid. And so she already kind of set that precedent. But, so I think science is obviously catching up to that, and it's going to be hard to disprove this when we're finding more and more fossils that this is actually the reality, it's not an outlier. So what happens is, to try to make sense of this genetic thing, and this was something new that I learned and just kind of put this together, in my own haplogroup then, it's passed down. But what happens is when you're maternal, I had, and 4 or 5 generations ago, I had a grandmother on my father's side who was 100% Native American. Now my family's been here like 400 years, so the opportunity for something like that is obvious. But how am I only, I'm 99.6%. My DNA is more than the haplogroup in people living in Scandinavia. And here I had 100% DNA of a great-grandmother 4 or 5 generations. Well, how can that be? Don't I have a little bit of everybody and should it still be there? Well, here's how Mother Nature works. The female, maternal, there's what's called recombination. These genes, all these genes are passed on. but because females only, through maternally, only pass on half their genes to their offspring, the half that you get or the half that you get might be different than your recipient. So you will carry some traits, and as you pass that on to your children, the half that you're passing on will go through recombination. The male paternal will carry on fairly strongly throughout, and that's why you can trace the male much longer, the paternal much longer back, and why I know now I have Viking ancestry. But the reality is then through recombination, you also have variations then in some of these traits that will be passed on. And so if there was a female, 100% European female abducted and had children with a unknown hominid, emergent hominid there, and those children survived, and over time, and there wasn't any other abductions going on. I think some of these abductions have happened because of, sometimes it was just that there wasn't enough, population-wise, there wasn't enough people or something, so they would get something to make their breed a little more appealing. But as we know, things happen. They were just emerged, these hominids were interbreeding, so we know they were doing that. So over time then, if it's just an isolated population, especially when you look at when there's been a disease contagion, they're staying away from us humans, Homo sapiens, because we die. Somebody comes home and they're interacting with them, they die. Let's avoid them like the plague. Over time, they would have just been breeding within their own populations, and that dominant paternal group, which is the ancient emergent hominid that originally emerged an upright walking hominid, that would have more of that ape-type features, and that would carry through. And so what we're seeing is, interesting enough, during the height of the Woodwose, the Woodwose looked almost human-like. And there were some features that looked very human. The hooded nose is very important for something to swim. You have to have a hooded nose. Like other apes, their noses aren't quite hooded, and they can't swim. You have to have a hooded nose to be able to swim, so you won't drown. So that's a feature that's really important. And that's what we see. You might see a flatter nose that's more wider and flatter, but it is hooded, and that clearly shows that they can swim and they're very adapted to swimming, and we know that. What they eat, and the fact that they live in all these rivers and use the river system. So getting back to this, we have also some mongoloid-looking ones that might have some genetic problems, like DNA issues if there's interbreeding. You would also have the propensity to have always reverting back to this ancient DNA that is very ape-like in appearance. So I think that kind of helps us explain and understand a little bit of these variations in what they look. So if somebody says, well, I saw one that looked, just human, had beautiful hair, and looks just like, there was probably some sort of interaction that was more recent in the last 100 years, or that recombination carried over more in that. It might have been on the male side of the family, maybe a male had Homo sapien male had bred with a Sasquatch, and then their offspring would do that. It's really hard to say all these things, but what I'm pointing at is that this would definitely explain their variations and how they would look. And so I think when people are talking about it, and this, I think her name's Sylvia Irwin on the BFRO website, she has Sabella, yeah. She draws pictures from people's experiences, what they saw. And they're really good. They look real. They look real.